A high-pitched, inhuman squawk fills the air as the red-costumed puppet raises his club. With a sickening crack, he brings it down on his wife's head, again and again, until she collapses. And then the children in the audience erupt with laughter. And can you believe that the very same puppet was used by the government to stop a religious cult? It actually worked better than you might imagine. For over 350 years, British children have been entertained by a demonic puppet who murders his baby, beats his wife to death, and defeats the devil himself, all while audiences laugh and cheer him on. This is the story of Mr. Punch, a character who began as adult entertainment in Restoration England and somehow transformed into a beloved children's icon while maintaining his violent, anarchic spirit. Today you might think of Punch and Judy as quintessentially British seaside entertainment for children, as traditional as soggy chips and seagulls pinching your ice cream. But beneath the colourful striped booth lies a rather darker history, one of demonic pacts, secret devices that have claimed performers' lives, and a psychological paradox that reveals some quite uncomfortable truths about human nature. By the end of our journey together, you'll discover how a character with origins in the Italian commedia dell'arte became a symbol of British culture, how Victorian moral reformers tried and failed to censor him, bless their cotton socks, and why we continue to laugh at violence when it's performed by puppets that would horrify us if enacted by humans.
The modern facade. Punch and Judy at the seaside.
All right. Let us begin with the familiar. The colourful striped booth at the British seaside, the excited children gathering around, and that distinctive call of, "It's the way to do it!" Oh, this is Punch and Judy as most people know it today, a seemingly innocent puppet show that has become a proper staple of British holiday entertainment, right up there with sunburn and sand in your sandwiches. But even in this sanitized modern form, the violence remains. Punch still beats Judy, still throws the baby out the window, still defeats the policeman who comes to arrest him. And you, along with the audience, primarily children, still laugh and cheer as Punch triumphs through violence. This raises our first question. Why do we allow, even encourage, our children to laugh at behavior that would be criminal if performed by humans? Bit of a head-scratcher, that one.
Behind the striped booth, the secret world of professors.
The performers who operate Punch and Judy shows are traditionally known as professors, a title that hints at the specialized knowledge required. Let's peel back the first layer by exploring the secretive world of these performers, past and present. The most closely guarded secret was the swazzle, the small device made of 2 strips of metal bound around a cotton tape reed that creates Punch's distinctive voice when held in the performer's mouth. For centuries, professors would go to extraordinary lengths to protect this secret. The device is so small that it's easily swallowed accidentally, and there's a common saying among Punch and Judy masters that you can't consider yourself a full professor until you've swallowed at least 2 swazzles, a testament to both the difficulty of mastering the technique and the occupational hazards of the profession. The delicate balance between secrecy and survival was frankly as precarious as building a sandcastle below the high tide line. You might not know that these shows traditionally employed a bottler, the assistant who collected money in a bottle and acted as intermediary between performer and audience. The bottler also played an important role in attracting crowds, providing musical accompaniment with drums or panpipes, and engaging in back-and-forth banter with the puppets, sometimes repeating lines that may have been difficult for the audience to understand. Rather like that friend who explains the punchline of every joke, but actually quite useful. Unlike the grand theatrical companies of the human stage, Punch and Judy thrived through family dynasties that passed the tradition down through generations. The Codman family stands as perhaps the most remarkable example, maintaining an unbroken line of Punch and Judy men for 4 generations from 1864, beginning with Richard Codman I. The family commissioned specially crafted figures in the early 19th century that became their trademark. Their performances became fixtures in Liverpool and across northern Wales. Other prominent families who carried the tradition into the 20th century include the Greens, Jessons, Smiths, Carcass, and Maggs, each establishing their own touring circuits across seaside resorts and fairs, building loyal local followings wherever they performed. They were the puppet equivalent of rock stars, minus the groupies, and plus a lot more splinters. While many professors operated within their regional circuits, some achieved notable fame for their exceptional skill. Performers like Alfred Lemaire and Douglas Alexander were known not just for their performances, but also for crafting their own props and puppets. Many ran small shops selling puppets and theatrical supplies, becoming important hubs for the continuation of the craft. These individuals were more than mere entertainers. They were custodians of a living tradition, each adding their own innovations while preserving the essential character of Mr. Punch. The social status of Punch and Judy men throughout history has ranged from street performers struggling to survive to respected entertainers with royal patronage, and their fortunes could turn on a sixpence, like a puppeteer yanking on a string.
The Devil's Voice. Origins in the demonic.
Now we travel back to the beginning. On May 9th, 1662, Samuel Pepys recorded in his diary witnessing an Italian puppet play in Covent Garden, which he described as very pretty, the best that ever I saw. Later, historical research identified the performer as Pietro Gimondi, also known as Signor Bologna, who featured the character Pulcinella, the Italian precursor who would evolve into Mr. Punch. This date, May 9th, is now traditionally celebrated as Punch's birthday in Britain, though I've yet to see Hallmark make a card for it. Happy birthday. Here's to another year of domestic violence and infanticide. Much love. Punch's origins lie in the Italian Pulcinella character from Commedia dell'arte, a theatrical tradition that emerged in the 16th century Italy. While some scholars have suggested possible connections between commedia characters and earlier theatrical forms like the Roman Atellan farces, the direct lineage from ancient fertility rituals to Pulcinella is not definitively established by historical evidence. His physical appearance, the hooked nose, the hunchback, the red costume, and his voice connect to medieval representations of the devil and trickster figures. The early Punch was not a children's character, but performed for adult audiences in streets and taverns. His shows were bawdy, violent, and often political, featuring topical satire and commentary on current events. Initially performed as marionette shows with strings, Punch performances gradually shifted to glove puppets in the latter half of the 18th century, which allowed for more violent and physical comedy while being easier to transport and set up on street corners. This was entertainment for the common people that often mocked authority figures, a tradition that would continue throughout Punch's history. Even today, Punch's legacy is woven into the fabric of Covent Garden, where it all began. The Punch and Judy pub, dating back to 1787, stands in Covent Garden's Market Building, a stone's throw from where Samuel witnessed that first performance. If you visit, you'll find a commemorative plaque on St. Paul's Church opposite the pub, a reminder that While we may now sip pints where puppets once brawled, the spirit of Mr. Punch's anarchic entertainment lives on in the very stones of the place. You'd be forgiven for thinking that a character who beats his wife, throws his baby out the window, and murders various authority figures might have struggled to find an audience in polite society. But much like that one friend who somehow gets away with saying the most outrageous things at dinner parties, Mr. Punch managed to charm his way into the British cultural landscape. But Punch's journey from Italian import to British icon wasn't accidental. It took one remarkable showman, described by his contemporaries as a deformed cripple, to transform puppet theatre from street entertainment to high society's favourite guilty pleasure. And you won't believe how he used his puppets to solve a national crisis.
Martin Powell, the golden age of marionettes.
Punch's rise to prominence in British culture owes much to one remarkable figure, Martin Powell, an Irish master puppeteer who flourished between years 1709 and 1720. Despite being described by contemporaries as a deformed cripple, Powell was a brilliant showman whose talents elevated puppet theatre to unprecedented heights. Proof, if you needed it, that in the puppet world, it wasn't how you looked, but how you pulled the strings that mattered. In 1710, Powell established what he grandly dubbed Punch's Opera, or Punch's Theatre. By 1711, he'd secured a prestigious location in the galleries of Covent Garden's Little Piazza, directly opposite St. Paul's Church. This wasn't your typical street puppet booth. Powell created a miniature version of the grand theatres, complete with elaborate scenery and candle footlights. He explicitly aimed to create a place commodious and fit to receive the nobility and gentry of both sexes, and remarkably, he succeeded in attracting high society audiences. Quite the achievement, getting the toffs to watch puppets bash each other. Powell's genius lay in his satirical repertoire. He engaged in a heated rivalry with Her Majesty's Theatre in Haymarket, which staged serious dramas and operas. Powell's response? Merciless puppet parodies of these grand, often pretentious productions. But his puppets weren't just for entertainment. They wielded political power too. When French prophets caused disturbances in Moor Fields in 1710, the ministry ordered Powell to make Punch turn prophet. According to Lord Chesterfield, his puppet show totally extinguished the prophets and their prophecies. Imagine that. National crisis averted by puppets. Powell crafted his own puppet figures and wrote his own plays, with Punch featuring prominently in various performances. This period, roughly 1709 to 1720, is often called the Golden Age of marionettes in England, and Powell is credited with establishing the stock form of Punch plays that would become so beloved. Though his popularity waned in his later years before his death in 1729, Powell's influence on the tradition cannot be overstated. He transformed Punch from a foreign curiosity into a distinctly British cultural phenomenon embraced by all social classes. But Punch's journey wasn't always smooth sailing. A century later, he would face his greatest challenge yet: Victorian moral reformers who were determined to clean up entertainment and protect innocent minds from corruption. Would Mr. Punch survive the era of strict morality and proper behavior? The answer might surprise you.
Victorian moral panic and adaptation.
The Victorian era brought significant challenges to Mr. Punch. As society became increasingly concerned with propriety and moral education, Punch's violent antics came under scrutiny. Moral reformers campaigned against the shows, considering them harmful influences on both children and the working classes. These were the same people who thought piano legs should wear trousers, mind you. The tradition survived this period of moral apprehension through strategic adaptation. Some characters, like Pretty Polly, Punch's mistress, and certain bawdy elements, gradually disappeared from many shows as they became more focused on child audiences. Others, like the Hangman, traditionally known as Jack Ketch, were transformed. The devil, however, remained a popular adversary for Punch, with the traditional ending often featuring Punch's triumphant battle with this ultimate authority figure. Yet remarkably, the core violence, Punch's murder of his wife and child, remained largely intact. Apparently, wife-beating was acceptable family entertainment long before EastEnders made it a Christmas tradition. Charles Dickens surprisingly defended Punch and Judy shows in a letter to Mary Tyler dated November 6, 1849, in which he argued,
"In my opinion, the street punch is one of those extravagant reliefs from the realities of life which would lose its hold upon the people if it were made moral and instructive. I regard it as quite harmless in its influence, and as an outrageous joke which no one in existence would think of regarding as an incentive to any kind of action or as a model for any kind of conduct. One secret source of pleasure, very generally derived from this performance, is the satisfaction the spectator feels in the circumstance that likenesses of men and women can be so knocked about without any pain or suffering."
This reveals the complex Victorian relationship with entertainment, violence, and moral instruction. Dickens, of course, knew a thing or two about entertaining the masses with tales of misery and violence. He just used words instead of puppets. While its popularity waned slightly in the mid-19th century, Punch and Judy experienced a remarkable revival towards the end of the Victorian era. This resurgence was largely thanks to the introduction of bank holidays in 1871, which provided the working classes with unprecedented leisure time. Suddenly, Mr. Punch found himself in high demand at parties, social events, and most significantly, at the rapidly expanding seaside resorts that were becoming accessible to ordinary people through the growing railway network. The puppet that had once entertained street crowds in London was now a fixture of middle-class family holidays, cementing his transition from adult entertainment to children's amusement. This Victorian period saw a fascinating contrast in theatrical scale. Human theatre was becoming increasingly grand, with new theatres being built and old ones remodeled to accommodate elaborate scenic designs. Stages adopted a picture frame effect, allowing for spectacular productions that dazzled audiences. Meanwhile, Punch and Judy booths remained deliberately small and portable, a practical necessity for performers who needed to travel between locations. This contrast in scale perhaps added to Punch's appeal. While human theatre grew more distant and formal, the puppet booth maintained an intimate, accessible quality that felt immediate and personal. It was the theatrical equivalent of choosing a cozy pub over a posh wine bar. You might assume that puppet theatre, with its smaller scale, would be simpler and cheaper to produce than human theatre. Surprisingly, this wasn't necessarily the case. Punch and Judy shows could be more complicated and less direct than their human counterparts, requiring significant time and labor to create the puppets and their mechanisms. Each figure needed to be carved, painted, costumed, and articulated, a process demanding considerable skill and investment. The professor's art was not a poor man's substitute for real theatre, but rather a distinct and demanding theatrical tradition with its own technical complexities and artistic challenges. But this still doesn't answer our most puzzling question. Why do we laugh at violence when puppets do it? What strange psychological mechanism allows us to enjoy watching a puppet commit alarming acts that would disgust us in real life? The answer reveals something rather disturbing about human nature.
The psychological function why we enjoy puppet violence.
A curious paradox sits at the heart of Punch and Judy. Why do we relish watching and actively encourage our children to enjoy violent acts that would otherwise horrify us? It's a bit like our relationship with cats. We'd be repulsed if our friends regularly gifted us dead birds. But when Fluffy does it, we just sigh and reach for the dustpan. Several theories might explain this curious phenomenon. First, the puppet medium creates psychological distance that allows safe exploration of taboo subjects. When you watch Punch beat the policeman, you're not witnessing actual violence, but a symbolic representation. It's rather like watching your in-laws argue at a family gathering. Uncomfortable, but somehow entertaining when you know you can leave afterwards. Second, Punch represents the id, our unrestrained desires and impulses, temporarily freed from social constraints. He does what we sometimes wish we could do, but never would. He's the little voice in your head that wants to tell your boss exactly what you think of them. Third, the shows function as a safety valve for societal tensions, allowing symbolic rebellion against authority. Imagine the satisfaction of the working-class Victorian audience as they watched Punch defeat the policeman, the judge, and even the devil himself. Fourth, the exaggerated, stylized nature of the violence removes it from reality. The slapstick quality, with its distinctive sound effects and exaggerated movements, signals that this isn't real violence. It's about as realistic as thinking a cup of tea solves all problems, though as a Brit, I'm legally obligated to believe that it does. Finally, the tradition connects to ancient ritual functions of performance, where normal rules are temporarily suspended. You're entering a space where the usual moral constraints don't apply. Mr. Punch has survived for over 350 years precisely because of his darkness, not despite it. The historical and psychological evidence points to a fascinating conclusion about this enduring character. Unlike many cultural traditions that have been completely sanitized over time, Punch maintains his essential nature because it serves a psychological function that each generation recognizes, even if unconsciously. Like how we enjoy murder mysteries, but I have no desire to bump off the vicar in the library with a candlestick. This explains why attempts to make Punch more PC have largely failed, from Victorian moral reformers to modern concerns about domestic violence. When the darkness is removed, Punch loses his essential purpose. Yet the tradition has adapted just enough to survive in changing social contexts. The annual Covent Garden Mayfair and Puppet Festival, returning to where the character was first witnessed, demonstrates this ongoing negotiation between tradition and contemporary values. The 2024 festival featured a new interpretation developed as part of the Judy project, a 3-year study by University of Exeter researchers examining women's roles in puppetry traditions. In this version, the violence is directed more toward institutions of authority rather than individuals, and Judy questions the treatment she has received from Punch over hundreds of years, while still maintaining the anarchic spirit that has defined Punch for centuries. About bloody time, some might say. Mr. Punch stands as one of the most enduring characters in British cultural history, a demonic figure who survived centuries of social change while maintaining his essential darkness. His journey from the streets of Restoration London to the seaside resorts of today reveals not just the evolution of entertainment, but something deeper about human nature. Perhaps the most uncomfortable truth is that Mr. Punch endures because he allows us to laugh at the very things we most fear and condemn: violence, rebellion against authority, and the darker impulses we all possess but rarely acknowledge. The puppet booth creates a safe space where these taboo subjects can be explored without consequence. It's a theatrical equivalent of those conversations you only have after 3 pints when the truth comes out, but everyone pretends not to remember it the next day. As you encounter Punch and Judy in the future, whether at a seaside resort, a festival, or a historical exhibition, look beyond the colorful booth and listen past the children's laughter. You're witnessing not just a quaint tradition, but one of humanity's oldest psychological mechanisms: the use of performance to process our darkest impulses and most forbidden desires. Rather profound for something that usually ends with a crocodile getting a sausage, isn't it? For more explorations of the darker side of cultural history, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit the bell icon for notifications of new episodes.